Hi everyone, great to have you join me as I explore this intriguing unsolved murder mystery. In this talk I'll take you through some of the major conspiracy theories surrounding the case, as well as of course the supernatural elements. By the end of this talk you'll see why this 75-year-old mystery remains as captivating today as ever. So let me set the scene for you. It's 1943, Britain is at war with Germany, life back at home is hard. In a small village called Hagley in central England, 4 teenage boys are about to make a gruesome discovery. On the 18th of April 1943, 4 teenage boys were in the woods poaching. They came upon an ancient hollow elm tree. One of the boys climbed up into the tree, but as he glanced down inside the hollow trunk, he found himself frozen with fear. For staring back at him were the empty eye sockets of a whitened skull. Now the boys were technically trespassing, and they were afraid that they would get into trouble if anyone knew they'd been there, so they all agreed to make a pact. They would keep their discovery a secret. Hagley Woods is owned by Hagley Hall Estate, the property of Lord Cobham, so they didn't want to get into trouble. They very, very carefully replaced the skull in the tree and ran home. But it wasn't long before one of the boys broke down and told his father. Now he informed police, and unlike today, reports of a human skull being found in woodlands, the police didn't go straight away. They waited until the next morning. When they got there, they searched the tree and the area, and they recovered an almost complete human skeleton and remains of clothing. The West Midlands Chief Forensic Officer, Professor James Webster, he was assigned to the case, and after a detailed examination of the remains, he produced his report. She was a female aged around 35. Under 5 feet tall, with mousy wavy hair. She'd given birth at least once, had irregular protruding teeth, and was wearing cheap clothing with no labels. A drawing was issued to the press in the hope that it might jog someone's memory or strike a chord with potential relatives or friends. But nothing. No one came forward. No one seemed to miss her. No one seemed to know who she was. A year went by before another clue emerged. In 1944, a series of graffiti messages began appearing on walls and fences in the local area. They're all slightly different, but they're all variations of the same message. Who put Bella in the Wytch Elm? And although the case has always focused around the name Bella, the very first piece of graffiti actually said who put Lou Bella in the Wytch Elm. Now the person who wrote that first piece of graffiti was never found. But who were they? Who was this mysterious person? Who was Bella, and why did they know what had happened? As you can imagine, it didn't take long before various conspiracy theories began to do the rounds. Now there are many, some have evidence to support them and some don't. In this talk I'll just be going through a couple of the major conspiracy theories, the one that captivated the public's attention, and you'll see why. Now, as soon as the body was discovered, there were already rumours amongst locals to do with pagan groups, occult groups being involved.
There have long been suggestions that the areas named Hagley, Wychbury Hill, have occult roots. We do know that the area surrounding Hagley Woods and Wychbury Hill have long been a meeting place for various groups, pagans, covens. So we know that this takes place. Local dog walkers have often described finding remnants left from the previous night's rituals, burnt out candles, discarded headdresses. Some even claim to have found animal sacrifices in certain sites. Many of the older trees that form part of the wood are actually now adorned with pagan symbols and flowers left as a token to the trees. And the woods do have a very unusual feel. When you walk through them, many people describe a sense of being watched, and actually a lot of local people avoid the woods completely. So we know that groups have often chosen the area to practice their worship and their rituals. But it wasn't until sometime later, after the discovery of the body, that the witchcraft theory really took off. And that was when a well-known anthropologist, Professor Margaret Murray, became involved in the case. Now, she'd heard a rumour that a severed hand had been buried some distance from the rest of the remains. Now, she claimed that this was clearly evidence of occult practices, and she said it was the hand of glory. This was a practice whereby apparently witches would sever the hand and bury it nearby to help prevent the soul of the witch roaming. She claimed that this was strong evidence that the poor woman had been killed by a local coven, either for betraying them if she'd been part of the coven herself, or for some other unknown reason. Now, there were also suggestions that the tree itself was symbolic when it comes to the witchcraft theory. Elm trees have long been used as the wood to make coffins, and there is a tale in old British folklore of witch elms being places where you would hide the body of a witch. So hollow trees were used because it was the belief that the shell of the tree could prevent the witch's soul from roaming and wreaking havoc in the local area. But given the timing during World War II, could there be another explanation? There are actually 2 or 3 conspiracy theories involving some form of espionage, but I want to talk to you about the main one, the most interesting, the one that actually has a good weight of evidence to support it. And this involves a man by the name of Joseph Jacobs. Joseph Jacobs was a German spy. He was the last man to be executed at the Tower of London. In 1941, he parachuted into Cambridgeshire and was captured. Now, when he was captured, he was carrying a small case which contained a transistor radio, some local maps and other bits and bobs, which left authorities in no doubt at all that he was a spy. He also had with him a photograph of a woman. He claimed she was his girlfriend and fellow agent, a woman named Clara Barrell. Apparently she was due to parachute into the Midlands at some point, but they'd lost radio contact and he never heard from her again. The Midlands was a focus for the Nazis, mainly due to the large munitions factories that were there. Did she parachute in? Was she the woman in the Wytch Elm? Well, there are a few interesting things to know about Clara Barrell. She was a cabaret singer who Joseph Jacobs had apparently met in Hamburg before the war when she was singing. Now, he claimed that she'd been recruited by senior Nazis because she'd spent some time before the war working in central England singing and acting, and that she could speak with a very convincing Midlands accent. The other interesting point to know about this particular theory is that in 1941, the year that Joseph Jacobs was captured and the year he claims Clara was meant to parachute into the Midlands, that very year the local Hagley Home Guard were alerted to a parachute drop on the nearby Clent Hills, which is only 2 miles from where the woman was found in the elm tree. Now, when the Home Guard arrived at the scene, they did find a parachute harness, but they never found anyone. There was no one there. had that been Clara? The timing seems right as well. She was born in 1906, which means she would have been 35 years old had she died in 1941. The other thing that's very interesting is that according to the foreign newspaper reports, Clara Barrel's singing and acting career came to a very abrupt and unexpected end overseas in 1941. And remember, the woman in the Wytch Elm had no labels in her clothing. This was a common thing that spies would do, because if they were captured when they landed overseas, they wouldn't speak, they would be silent. The labels in the clothing might be the only thing that could give away their country of origin. So labels were removed. The final thing I want to tell you about Clara is that according to some photographs and old footage that we found, she did have slightly misaligned front teeth. She also had slightly wavy, mousy hair. So was Clara Bella? It's been suggested that Midlands audiences may have misheard her name, Clara Barrel, as Clara Bella. What do you think? Could the answer actually be a little closer to home? So when a body is found today and probably in the past, the most obvious explanation is someone local. We know that with killers, they tend to operate within their local area, on their own stomping ground, somewhere they're comfortable with and familiar with. We know that the victims of murder often know their killers.
There must have been, in my view, a local connection. The body was found in a hollow tree, in a wood. It's not the sort of thing that you would just discover by walking into the wood. Whoever put her in the tree, I think, must have had a lot of local knowledge. They must have known the tree existed, they must have known it was hollow, and they must have known before they set out that it was a potential place to hide a body. You couldn't just stumble on a location like that, I don't think.
The forensic report agreed, stating that the tree in which the body was found was the best and indeed the only place a body could be hid. But a local woman? A local killer? Why did no one come forward, recognising who she may be? Why did no one miss her? Why had no one reported her missing or her killer? After a few years of dead ends and local silence, police actually closed the file. After all, no one seemed to be grieving for this woman. No one had came forward. No one was missing her. And of course, during World War II, there were simply far more important things to report on in the newspapers and for the police and authorities to be focused on. For all intents and purposes, Bella had been forgotten. In 1949, however, the case was reopened when an anonymous letter was sent to police in which someone claimed they had seen a band of gypsies close to the site of the body's discovery around the right time. The piece of land next to the area of woodland where the tree was known locally in the 30s and 40s as a regular traveller stop-off point, and when you're at that piece of land, you would apparently have been able to clearly see the tree through the woodland. So connected to travellers and gypsies was this local area around Hagley Woods that the pub across the road was named the Gypsies' Tent. It was even suggested that the name Bella was a clue. The very first piece of graffiti, as I mentioned, actually stated Lou Bella. Now, a letter went into police, but it was never made public. It was kept in the files. Now, this letter claimed that the name Lou Bella was actually a very common traveller name and that it was derived from bluebell. Now, Hagley Woods, like many woods, has always been known for its vast amount of bluebells. Had someone just simply found it a very fitting name for the woman they'd murdered? Would that explain why no one locally missed her when she was gone? So these are just some of the theories: witchcraft, Nazi espionage, or some kind of local connection, potentially a traveller community involved. There is so much to this case, much more than I could ever fit in to this talk. But there are some things that for me make the case of who put Bella in the Wytch Elm so suspicious. Number 1, the tree. This is the infamous image of the Wytch Elm tree where the woman was supposedly found. It was given to reporters, apparently by groundsmen at the Hagley Hall estate at the time, and it was published in the newspapers. The police went along with this being the tree, and that photograph, it's become synonymous with the case. But in 2015, the police files for the Bella case were finally declassified. Now, I went to the National Archives in Kew and I found the files and I went through them, and I found a photograph of a tree, a crime scene photograph, and this is it. Now, it doesn't take a genius to see this is not the same tree. Now, why might this be? Well, whatever the reason that the estate and authorities hid the location and the appearance of the actual tree in which she was found, we'll never know. But what we do know is that in releasing the first image of the tree, it kind of skewed the whole case. The police were sure that more than one person must be involved. The first tree that was shown, the one that they went on when they built their case, oh, it's tall, it's a big tree, and so it was suggested that one person alone couldn't possibly lift a dead body to that height and put her in that tree. Well, we know now, of course, from the original crime scene photographs, that the tree was much smaller, and actually one person could have easily placed her in there alone. My second red alert is the missing paperwork. So until 2015, when the case was officially closed and the files were declassified, this was an open murder case. So it had been an open murder case for over 70 years. And yet so much of the paperwork is missing. Witness statements, reports. Why? Why are these things missing? Don't you think that authorities would be carefully looking after the files of an open murder inquiry? The next red alert also relates to missing things, missing evidence. Now, some of the clothing found at the scene would potentially be incredibly important when it comes to trying to identify who she was. Some of that clothing, including her shoes, have gone missing. In the original file, there is a statement from a police officer who was present when the body and the clothing was discovered, and he mentions a handbag. There has never been any handbag, not on the forensic report or in the photographs. So why is that? During World War II, it was compulsory to carry identification. So that handbag would have contained ID. It would have told us who Bella was. Why did a handbag, which was apparently present in the woods when they made the discovery, vanish and not form part of the case at all? But the biggest, the most bizarre element to this case is the fact that the remains of Bella have vanished. Human remains, an almost complete skeleton, is nowhere to be found and hasn't been since the 1940s. The last place we know that it was at Birmingham Medical School. It was apparently donated to them by Professor Webster once he'd completed his forensic report. We approached them for my documentary and there was no comment. They have no record of her. How do you lose a human skeleton? A human skeleton involved in an open murder inquiry. So, with missing evidence, missing remains, no witnesses, no relatives apparently grieving for her, despite the fact that she'd given birth at least once, could this all prove the catalyst for a restless spirit? It's no surprise really, is it, that Hagley Woods and the surrounding area has played host to a large number of paranormal reports and activity over the years, which many put down to the restless spirit of Bella. The Gypsies' Tent pub in particular is known for its poltergeist activity, with cleaners experiencing hoovers being unplugged from the walls in the morning while they're using them, things going missing, glasses falling from the shelves, doors slamming. Is it Bella? Is she trying to get attention? We know that in some cases soul spirits can be restless, can be trapped in a place because they're seeking justice. They need their story to be told. If any spirit needs someone to hear what really happened to them, it would be Bella. But it's not the pub that intrigues me the most. It's the reports coming from the woods themselves, which really give me the chills. According to eyewitnesses, a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothing has often been seen walking through Hagley Woods. And what's interesting about it is that dogs often behave strangely around her. I spoke to a witness who had been walking with his partner, their son and their dog one afternoon, and they saw the woman, and at first they assumed she was some kind of 1940s reenactor. She was so convincingly dressed. Now, he described what he saw as a woman just walking through the woods, passing behind a tree, re-emerging, passing behind another tree, re-emerging as you would expect. Things got weird when she reached the final tree, disappeared, and didn't come out the other side. At that point, the dog froze and started howling and wouldn't walk any further. What had they seen? What have the other people seen? Who is this mysterious woman in old-fashioned clothing in Hagley Woods, if not Bella? The road between the Gypsies' Tent pub and Hagley Woods has also had more than its fair share of paranormal activity, with a figure apparently coming out of the woods and crossing the road, causing cars to swerve and narrowly avoid each other. Of course, when they stop and look, there isn't anyone there. Let me tell you, it's a brave Hagley resident who ventures into those woods and up onto Wychbury Hill after dark, especially given the fact that in 2005, more human remains were found just yards from where Bella had been found. Again, like Bella, those remains were found by teenage boys, and like Bella, they remain unidentified. Is something suspicious happening in Hagley Woods? Well, the mystery certainly isn't going away anytime soon, and even to this day, graffiti occasionally appears in the local area asking that timeless question: who put Bella in the Wytch Elm?